Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, everybody dialing in. My name is Andre Duplessis. I'm the Executive Director of ILGA World, he, him. ILGA World is a 40-year-old federation of 1,600 plus LGBTIQ rights organizations from about 160 countries, literally around the world. And we're really delighted to be co-hosting this event today with Stonewall, the Human Rights Campaign, and a fantastic group of panelists. I'm going to get to the panelists, so I think you can probably see on the screen already. But before starting the event, just a few housekeeping things. So this event is being live streamed on our YouTube channel, and it's also going to be recorded, and we are going to publish it on our social media accounts in the next few days. Secondly, the only thing that you can actually see in this webinar is the panelists. So you are, in case you have any security or privacy concerns, you can't be seen. So just wanted to let you know that. We have enabled the chat function on this, and so we do encourage you all to interact. We believe there's quite a few of you out there, so please go ahead and type in the chat and introduce yourselves. So we really do hope that this event can be one opportunity to connect people who really are committed to achieving LGBTI equality for all. And so if you'd like to share resources from your organization, for example, we will collect those links and we're going to compile them and we're going to make them available to everybody in a follow-up email afterwards. So you don't have to be furiously copying links that you really like. Very occasionally, we do get people who have the opposite intent, who are not there for LGBTI equality for all, will sometimes join these webinars. For that reason, we will be monitoring the chat. We don't tolerate any destructive or hate speech on our platforms, and we will, if necessary, expel people who engage in that. Because we expect a fair amount of very positive chat in that chat function, if you do have actually specific questions for the panelists, we're going to ask you to address those questions using the Q&A function, which you should see also on the bottom of the Zoom video there. And then we'll collect those and we'll pass them out around the panelists. So with that said, I'm just going to give a couple of minutes of a bit of a global where we are before we get going. In fact, not too long ago, it would have been absolutely impossible to have this conversation anywhere. LGBTI persons have been at best invisible in the workplace, but actually we have been shunned, we've been ridiculed, we've been harassed, we've been fired, or we couldn't even get jobs in the first place. And for many complex reasons, either we didn't fit in, we're not a good fit, or it's just that the whole societal structures have meant that we couldn't even get jobs. We've ended up working in the informal sector, and it has intersected with all the other kind of discriminations that we face as well. So what's amazing is that LGBTI activists have been working for decades to help change this, and we have seen things change in so many places around the world. And we still have a long, long way to go. There are only 77 countries around the world where there is even protection against discrimination based on sexual orientation in employment. And actually the number of countries that recognize or protect against gender identity and expression or sex characteristics discrimination is way lower than that. People are still being fired just for being who they are or who they love. At the international level, we've seen the intersection between business, the workplace, and human rights kind of rise. We've seen different frameworks being developed. There are important international labor law conventions that governments around the world sign up to. And in the last decade, we've seen the launch of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Human Rights that expressly recognizes that the private sector has a duty to respect all internationally recognized human rights. And then just a couple of years ago, the rainbow flag was kind of waved and put front and center for companies by the United Nations Office for Human Rights, and they launched the standards of conduct for business to tackle discrimination against LGBTI people. Those standards are voluntary sign-up standards for companies around the world, and basically 5 principles: that business should respect human rights at all times. Secondly, that they should eliminate discrimination in their own workplace. And thirdly, they should be providing support to their own LGBTI workforce. And then thinking outside, moving fourthly, to actually eliminate and advocate for elimination of discrimination in their supply and customer chains. And finally, kind of being an advocate for LGBTI human rights in this public sphere as well. So we're happy to see that development. We've been engaged in this conversation for many, many years, especially through our member organizations who are campaigning on the ground for change, but also working with trade unions who've been a fantastic ally through the years for LGBTI equality in the workplace, and now actually also working with business, with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum, and we also map the status of all the legislation that's happening in the world. So as I started, we're really proud to be organizing this event today. I've already mentioned Human Rights Campaign and Stonewall, who've both been such fantastic advocates for LGBTI equality and have done specific work with business and in the workplace. So I'm really glad to have you both as co-organizers here. And joining, we also have two corporations that have been part of a new partnership for global LGBTI equality that we're also part of. We have here from Accenture and also from Procter & Gamble. And we also have two colleagues representing the International Labour Organization, an international organization in Geneva, which works for workplace rights, and also the Council of Global Unions, the LGBTI working group there. So that's enough from me. At this point, I'm just going to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves, to give your name, your organization, where you are right now. And I'm also going to ask you how many Zoom calls or web Zoom calls have you been on during this week? So over to you, Leanne.
Oh my goodness, how many Zoom calls, but I think this is the best. You know, I think we should maybe just stop and look at the chat and see. It is like a tour of the universe. It's amazing, but it's also very, very heartening to see so many people from around the world that are all focused on what we're here to talk about today. So my name is Leanne McMillan. I'm the director of the global team at Stonewall. Stonewall's a really proud supporter of ILGA World. We're really pleased that you're doing this work. And I've been on a few Zoom calls this week, and I've got a big one tomorrow too. So I'm going to stop speaking and say over to you, Doreen.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Doreen Chow. I am Senior Director, Human Resources at Procter & Gamble. I'm joining from a small French town close to Geneva. My pronouns are she and her. And this is my first Zoom call this week, but I've had dozens and dozens of WebEx, Teams, and WhatsApp chats. All right, over to Gurchan.
Doreen, I haven't been as lucky as you. I think that I've lost count how many Zoom calls I have actually been on this week. Hi, everyone. I'm Gurchan Sandhu. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. I am a program officer at the International Labour Organization, working on non-discrimination in the Fundamental and Principles and Rights at Work branch, based here in sunny Geneva this afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us today. Over to you, Mitchell.
Hi, I am Mitchell Coe. I am the LGBT plus campaigner for Public Services International, which is the global union federation for all public service unions. And I'm calling in from France, and Zoom calls, they're all just running into each other at the moment. So I have no idea. Over to you, Beck.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Beck Bailey. My pronouns are he and him. I was so intrigued by the prompt that I went and counted on my calendar. This is my 28th Zoom call WebEx thing and my 7th presentation, and I have 2 more presentations today. So it's a big video week. And my organization is the Human Rights Campaign. I am the director of the Workplace Equality Program. Our organization does electoral and legislative work here in the United States, and then does public education and outreach work in the United States, but also with advocates all around the world. And such a pleasure to be here with this team of advocates today, including my friend Javier. Your turn.
Hey, hello, thank you very much. My name is Javier Leonor. My pronouns are he and him and he. Sorry, I'm from Accenture, as mentioned earlier in the call, and I'm sitting within the global HR team, inclusion and diversity, taking care of all the LGBTQ programs that we run globally. I am calling in from rainy Amsterdam at this moment, so basically in the Netherlands, really much less weather than in Geneva. And about the calls, I have the same as Doreen. This is my first Zoom call, but probably counting the calls that we have done on Teams, I think probably I would go now for the number 60 or something like that. So I think we're all overcalled, if I can say that. So with that, thank you, and back to you, Andre.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you, everybody. I didn't say where I am. I'm in Richmond, Virginia, with my husband here, but normally I'm over in Geneva in Switzerland, over there. And I think I'm actually pretty lucky this week. I've only been on 12 Zoom calls. We're going to shift now into the kind of the panel discussion. We're going to have build this around three kind of topic areas. The first question is actually I'm going to ask each of you, but I'm going to start with you, Javier, around probably many successes over the years. But what would you say are the biggest challenges that lie ahead for you and your organization in progressing LGBTI equality? What are the priorities that you see?
I think maybe I would like to mention three things that I am working on at the moment. One is actually a bit something that we already mentioned in the call is we want to keep the momentum and the engagement of our employees to make sure that we keep communicating with each other without overdoing it. I think we talked about the number of calls that we had today. I think we can also make it so mandatory and so obligatory that people will actually not want to join some of the calls. So that's one of the things, I think, keeping the balance between being, connected but not being over-connected. The second one, I think, is something that has to do with the way we want to progress. We want to start measuring things more and more. So we want to know again about, what are our LGBTQ employees, how fast are they advancing, how soon are they reaching the promotion level, how soon are they going into big roles or projects. And I think for that we need metrics. And we have lots of self-ID tools that we use at Accenture, which is great. And I think we all probably know those tools, but the legislation in many countries is not allowing us to record some of the data. So I think that especially if I look at continental Europe or Southeast Asia, I am a big fan of privacy, and I don't want to out anyone, obviously, but I think that if we would have more data, we would be able to advance more. I think that's one of the things that is hampering in my daily job. And the next one actually is a bit of trying to make sure that we keep embedding inclusion, LGBT, and all other types of inclusion in an everyday life. I think inclusion is not something that we have on a PDF, on a policy, on a portal that you just go there. And I think all of us in the call have probably wonderful HR policies that we all think are fantastic. But the real inclusion happens at the coffee machine, at the printer, when you have a meeting, when you have a Zoom meeting. And I think that in making sure that those contact moments with employees are inclusion oriented, or that people have the ability to actually take some lessons and apply them into those moments, that's great. And now with the pandemic, it's a bit more challenging because we're all behind the desktop. So it's a bit more difficult than usually when you're at the coffee machine, that you can just have some small talk about it. So those are the things that I would like to highlight.
Thank you, Javier. I love that line. Real inclusion is found at the coffee machine. Doreen, what about you at Procter & Gamble? Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I would say that after a really focused period of ensuring that we've done all we need to do internally to make sure that we've got the right culture that supports our employees, now we're turning our focus more externally. We want to ensure that we are champions for LGBTQ+ equality and inclusion, not just with our employees, but also with our business partners, the communities where we work, and ensuring that our brands are relevant. In terms of where we see the challenges, I know Javier's organization is much larger than P&G's, but when you're part of a global organization, it's tough. We're in many different kinds of diverse locations, all in very different cultural, legal, social contexts. And yet we try to operate consistently as one company. So I think that ensuring we do the right due diligence on policy work, making sure that it's gender neutral, as inclusive as possible, et cetera, that's always a challenge as well. And this is for myself as well, continuing always to learn in this area and to bring our organization along with us. You know, I'd like to say that in the area I'm responsible for in Europe, people are like more or less, you know, cognizant and fluent in challenges of being gay, in being lesbian. In the last couple of years, we've tried to increase the awareness on bisexual and transgender. I think there are still areas that are, you know, still blind spots for us that are around being gender fluid, non-binary, intersex. There's huge areas of learning that we still need to do to ensure that we're really fully inclusive. At P&G, we use the term LGBTQ plus inclusive. And I know it doesn't necessarily feel great to be called plus. So that's a continuing priority. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doreen, and thank you for that balance between what's happening internally, but then also actually how do you focus externally and the challenges when you're in multiple jurisdictions. Mitchell, you work for a trade union. What do you think? What are the biggest challenges lying ahead for you?
Well, much like Doreen said, the bigger your organization, the more challenges you have. And I mean, the union movement is a broad church. The global unions represent 207 million workers over 163 countries. So that's a challenge in itself. And we still have a lot of work to do to progress LGBT plus rights. But, you know, despite these challenges, there are huge opportunities for us. And one of the main strategies that we on the global union level are doing at the moment is running a shared campaign around LGBT plus rights with the sponsorship of one of our affiliated unions from the Netherlands, FNV. I'm coordinating an effort with the other global unions to prioritize and to better, I guess, our affiliated unions' responses to LGBT plus workers to improve their lives. And yeah, so we want to improve the representation of LGBT plus workers within unions' democratic structures, but also creating workplace policies that can be implemented and negotiated with employers. And also, as always, being a union, we organise workers, and one of the issues that we're organising them around is LGBTI workers. And there's lots of national trade unions that are doing some absolutely fantastic campaigns building these rights. And in order to share some of the wonderful work that these affiliates are doing, we've created a joint global unions website to share these campaigns, policies, education tools, so we can all learn from each other. And if you're interested in checking that out, the website is lgbtiworkers.org.
Thanks very much, Mitchell. And I like to talk getting LGBTI people into trade unions and also then the power of trade unions to negotiate with employers. Thanks for highlighting that. Gurjatin, you're with the International Labour Organization. Tell us, what are you facing?
Well, Andre, thank you very much for that important question. And it's not just the challenges that we have in front of us, these are great opportunities too. A large amount of the focus so far around the world of work, especially around the LGBTI business standards, focuses on workers in the formal economy. Now, the global economy is made up of two parts, the informal and the formal. Now, the formal economy only makes up 40%, where we know large amounts of workers are in the informal economy. And how do we get protection to them? And that's where we find LGBTI people the most, who are pushed out from the informal, from the formal, or can't get into the formal economy, are in the informal. So how do we provide them with protection? Now, the ILO is working very, very hard on this issue and moving from informalization and helping government and workers and economies move into the formal economy. So that's one of the biggest protections. That's the key challenge for not just LGBTI workers, but for all of us, because we know once you move them into the informal economy, you've guaranteed them protection. I think the other biggest issue right now as well, which we'll be discussing right now later, is how do we build back from COVID-19? I think this is the biggest opportunity that it presents itself right now, that we can build back better. And we can ensure that LGBTIQ plus people are included in the discussions as well. The other biggest challenge right now is something that Mitchell mentioned is, and I will mention again later, is ensuring that that LGBTI workers, through their trade workers organization representatives, are at that table. And how do we do that? Making sure that governments ratify key conventions of the ILO, enabling Convention 87 on freedom of association, as well as other core conventions of the ILO on non-discrimination in employment and occupation, and ensure that they include grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity in those. So I think those are the key challenges there, and make sure that we don't see an erosion of rights, but ensure that the enabling conditions and improvements for businesses to implement these standards are there as well. So those are some of the biggest challenges that we have. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Gurchattan. I love that. Thank you for reminding us around the informal sector. And that's where most queer people in the world are actually employed. And how do we address that when we're so often talking with the formal sector? And thank you also for reminding us about government's responsibilities on ratifying conventions here. Shifting to our civil society colleagues, Leanne.
Yeah, I mean, the last point is really important, and I'll try and pick up on it later, but I think it's true that, you know, we have some challenges like Doreen has pointed out in terms of applying from the global level to the local level, you know, with very, very large corporations, you know, the principles and practices that we would all agree to. And, you know, it's facing that reality in a world where there is COVID and where there are a lot of the communities that we would normally work with in civil society who aren't sustainable because of the effect of COVID, but also because of the effect of repression. So I think one of the key challenges is to keep going with that success. At Stonewall, we work with over 1,000 organizations, and, you know, we know how to help an organization along to be an inclusive employer and inclusive workplace. However, the challenge that we're all facing is in contexts where regimes governments are becoming much more repressive, and there's very little space for civil society. So we work across both civil society and business community. So I think that point about the context that we work in really needs to be taken on board. I think with COVID-19, it's not just a question of a lack of sustainability, it's finding new ways of working and building new tools and ways of communicating with each other, just like we're doing through this kind of call, so that we can actually help more people on the journey to learning and being accountable for how they are as employers. I guess the final thing that I feel really it's important to mention is that it's a shared challenge, and I'm not sure that we're all grappling with it to the extent that we are, and that is the anti-gender movement. And we're seeing this rise of anti-LGBTI policies, approaches, civil society working against the LGBTI community. And I think we really need to take on board that there is a very organized anti-gender movement out there that is actually very active, and we need to take it on up front. I have a long list, sadly.
And the list can keep going, I'm sure. But thank you for reminding us that, you know, while we can see many things advancing, there are some very hostile debates out there at the moment. Beck, from the Human Rights Campaign, please.
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up on that thread that Leanne had as well. You know, the Human Rights Campaign has a lot of programs and practices that cover a lot of different aspects, but fundamentally, what we're looking at is how do we advance both legal and policy protections for the LGBTI community, but also that sense of lived equality, you know, that coffee pot experience, right? And so to that end, with the Biden-Harris administration coming in the United States, we do see some opportunity or some relief to maybe make some advances in the realm of legal protections, not only here in the United States, but also through you know, more pro-equality champions appointed to the State Department, for example, and how the United States participates in the global discourse of LGBTI equality. And so, you know, we have some you know, glimmers of hope in the last few weeks as we approach the new administration. And that will be a priority for us to work closely with the administration. At the same time, what we see is what Leanne referred to, which to me is all backlash to our progress, right? We've made incredible progress as a community in certain parts of the world. And in those places where we have progress, we also have backlash. And here in the United States, that looks like a lot of state level anti-equality or anti-LGBTI legislation, and particularly anti-transgender legislation. So we'll be looking to defend our progress. So we're looking, kind of offensively how we make new progress, and defensively how we protect the progress we've made. And then lastly, I'll say, looking out for the most marginalized among us, and particularly under the pressures of the pandemic and how we see disproportionate impact on our own community through the lenses of intersectional identities. So, people of color, across gender lines, across ability, disability lines, and immigration status, class, all aspects of our identities, and how, as we're carrying more and more marginalized intersecting identities, those folks are facing deeper impact of unemployment, underemployment, deeper socioeconomic burden, deeper health disparities, and so on. So really prioritizing how we elevate and respond to the needs of the most marginalized within our own community.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Beck. And I think I have a sneaking suspicion that when we talk about COVID-19 responses later on this, how COVID-19 has drawn those disparities within our movements, but just in the whole planet. That is something, how do we act as good allies with other movements within the LGBTI, but also racial justice, gender justice, and beyond. Wow, thanks for that, everybody. The second question, if you remember at the beginning, I was talking about these new UN standards for LGBTI and business. And so I want to talk a little bit more specifically about them, because there's been a lot of discussion around them over the last few years, and we're seeing a lot of momentum. So Gurjatan, I'm going to go to you first and ask you, what kind of environment does the ILO provide for businesses in order to implement these new standards?
Well, Andre, I'm an economist by training and education. So, in my first economics class, not so long ago, one of the first things that I was taught was A equals B and B equals C, and therefore A equals C, right? So this is a classic economics value chain that we're taught. And this is something, then if you transfer the principles of human rights into that equation and labor rights, you get, if labor rights are equal to human rights and human rights are linked to LGBTIQ plus rights, therefore labor rights are also linked to LGBTIQ plus rights. Now, more beautifully, that is seen in, and that's reiterated in the Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work Declaration 1998, where the basic rights are reiterated of no child labor, no forced labor, non-discrimination, and freedom of association and collective bargaining. So that's standard one. Human rights, LGBTI rights are human rights, right? You've got that. So the ILO covers that. Then we have standard two, where we talk about non-discrimination in the workplace. ILO Convention 111 covers 7 grounds of non-discrimination. And to date, 175 countries have ratified that convention. Only 12 have not. And in Article 1 of that convention, it allows member states to include additional grounds of discrimination in consultation with their workers and employers' organizations. And what we've seen is more and more countries adding the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, sex characteristics into their equality laws in employment. However, we still see that only 77 countries have laws aligned to that include employment protection based on sexual orientation. Yet that means there's approximately 40 to 50 countries which have got gaps in their laws. So this is where the ILO can come in. okay, help governments along with their workers and employers organizations to align their laws better, especially employment protection. So that's standard 2. Then you have standard 3, allowing LGBTI networks to form within the workplace. Again, Convention 87, core convention of ILO, freedom of association in the workplace. Without that, how do workers, LGBTIQ plus workers in particular, form or become part of workers' organizations or trade unions and have their own branches per se? So that's number 3. And then we're doing some fantastic work. Standard 4, you talked about supply chains. And the ILO is working on how to promote working on promoting the fundamental principles and rights at work throughout supply chains. So those are the 4 key standards there that we provide the enabling conditions for businesses to work in. And without those enabling conditions, they're sort of like the foundation block, and that allow governments to align their laws according to those to those international conventions. Only then can businesses operate on a level playing field and help move, as I said, many of those workers from the informal economy into the formal economy where they will be protected as well. So I think this is, I think in a sense, the ILO provides that foundations for businesses to be able to protect LGBTIQ plus workers better and to implement those standards better. Thanks.
Wow, thank you, Gurchattan, for really setting out kind of that framework at the international level that the ILO offers. And as I was listening to you talking about influencing supply chains, I think that's exactly one way that businesses are expected to use their leverage under the standards to make sure that their suppliers are not discriminating. Thank you for that. Mitchell, what about trade unions? What role can they play in implementing or embedding these standards even within corporations?
Obviously being a trade unionist, I think unions play a critical role in embedding the standards within business. Indeed, I believe the guidelines actually point to the importance of collective agreements and companies working with trade unions to achieve better outcomes for LGBT plus workers. And I guess concretely, there are a number of ways that we are able to do this. At a global union level, one of the main areas we're interested in is ensuring that all workers within supply chains are protected and have working rights, much like Nanu said. One of the ways that global unions in particular are successful in ensuring this is through global framework agreements. And for those that don't know what these are, global framework agreements are collective agreements that are negotiated between multinational companies and global unions and apply to the company's operations all over the world. And these agreements ensure that workers are protected in terms of union rights, health and safety in their work environments across the entire company, regardless of what the local laws are. And at PSI and other global unions, we have negotiated clauses into these agreements that have protected LGBTI workers, particularly when it comes to LGBTI workers that are working in countries where it's illegal to be themselves. And we will continue to ensure that these are negotiated. But also, it is our job as trade unionists to hold corporations and companies to account, particularly if they're not ensuring LGBT rights for all workers throughout their company or supply chains. And one of PSI's affiliates, Unison, which is the public service union in the UK, is actually developing ethical procurement policy for UK Pride committees. So what they want to do is they want to create a campaign that enables Pride March procurers to promote companies and ensure that LGBT rights are maintained within their workplaces and supply chains. And it'll also be one of the guiding principles of this campaign is whether a company has global framework agreements. But also at a national level, there are so many unions that are negotiating better provisions, rights, security for LGBTI workers in collective agreements. And I have to say that it has to go beyond just a clause within a collective agreements. Kind of what Gurchan said, we need to ensure that our members are trained on equality issues, to know why we're negotiating LGBT plus clauses within agreements and why it's necessary, and for them to be able to identify homophobic, transphobic behaviour and what to do when they see it. So we want companies to allow our members access to meet and to organise in their workplace, to arrange events, to recognise our LGBT structures and representatives, and work with us to ensure that all workplaces are ultimately free from discrimination and harassment.
Yeah, thank you, Mitchell, for that. And I think for balancing there, like the negotiating, how important it is to negotiate those protection clauses into employers who only a few years ago were firing us for being LGBTI. We have to be protected, but then again, moving the envelope to the next stage and saying, how can we work and train with the employers? So I'm going to now turn to two corporations here. Doreen, I'm going to come to you first and just ask you, so what is the process of implementing these standards in your corporation looking like? And are you finding differences, as you mentioned earlier, in the implementation at headquarters and maybe also in your regional offices?
Okay, in terms of implementation, I guess I'm just going to be straight with the fact that P&G has been in business since 1837, and the standards for the last 3 years. So there's a bit of like retrofitting, but it's entirely consistent. So let me go through the 5 standards and tell you how it plays out. So the first one, in terms of respecting human rights, this is one of the fundamental values and principles upon which P&G is founded. It's there in our founding documents from those many years ago, and violations of our values and principles are a disciplinary offense up to and including termination. So it's kind of like price of entry. This is, you want to work here, this is what you do. Secondly, in terms of eliminating discrimination, 2020 marks 28 years since P&G added sexual orientation to our anti-discrimination policy. You know, in some ways, I wish that it could have been earlier, but 28 years is what it is, and that's a global anti-discrimination policy in effect everywhere that we operate. Thirdly, in terms of providing support, our main work here is in terms of our own internal affinity group. We call it GABLE, Gay, Ally, Lesbian, Bisexual Employees. And then, as I said, we've kind of had to adapt our terminology over the years, but we kept the name of the group the same. We operate on a kind of voluntary, employee-driven basis in as many locations as we can, as permissible by law. In terms of the 4th standard, preventing other human rights violations, you know, we buy a lot of raw materials, we buy a lot of pack materials, we use a lot of, you know, trucking companies, we sell to big customers. Globally, we try to consolidate our purchasing and our contracts, and we have in place very clear business partner guidelines about the standards of behavior to which we expect our partners to operate. In addition, in the last couple of years, we've tried to become more proactive about not just saying this is what we want, like, you know, make sure you're like this, but also inviting them in a couple of times per year to share our best practices in the areas of equality and inclusion in case they can reapply within their own organizations. The 5th standard around acting in the public sphere, this is probably newer to us, and probably the main action I would cite here is P&G as a founding member of the PGLE, founded in January 2019. We have a couple of employees who sit on the steering committee. We provide our expertise, our learnings, some financial support, and we really believe that being part of this large, credible coalition of organizations is a great way for us to help affect change in a way that we ourselves, as one consumer goods company, may not be able to do. So that's how I see the standards coming to life. And I would say that probably there's pretty uniform application of those 5 standards, with the exception that because we're a global company and many contracts are negotiated globally, the part about preventing other human rights violations, you know, I wouldn't expect that a small subsidiary in country X is going to be negotiating customer contracts. But pretty much we will hold our entire operation to the same standard.
Thank you. Actually, oops, I got some funny feedback here, sorry. I was just going to comment on the Gable, your employee organization. Actually, I think that's a really great example. I think Gurchathan was talking earlier about standard 3 at the of the ILO framework, which is that having LGBTI groups in the workplace can be such a way of bringing change about. And I think you've even produced a video about the story of Gable and how it actually helped to change the organization, but at least even also the cities where Procter & Gamble was located. So I think it was just a kind of just to recognize and a shout out to all those people who've been forming these groups internally at organizations, at corporations. Javier, I'm going to turn to you. Accenture is a very different business. Tell us about that.
Yes, I don't want to repeat a bit of what Doreen said, but I think we have many similarities in the way we operate and the way we try to implement the standards. Similar to Doreen, being a company from 1800 so much, we are a bit younger than that, but we do have 500,000 employees. So, you know, trying to make sure that we apply those 5 standards to everyone in the company, whether they're in London or they're in Dubai, there is a difference. You know, we have to make sure that we are smart about how we do it. I think, to be honest, if you look at the standards, and you look at the own company values, we call it core values in Accenture. We have 6 of them. And you have to see actually probably that most of those standards actually really align one-on-one with those corporate values. I don't think there's a company saying we want to exploit people, you know, or we want to be unequal. So I think, you know, it just makes sense. So we just have to make sure that we review those things, those standards, and we see where can we apply them in our values. One thing that I'm really happy to be in this call, and for many reasons, obviously, but one of them is to say thank you to ILGA, because actually one of the things that I have on my desktop in my computer is the ILGA map of 2019. So I think it's time to update it, guys. So sorry, just saying. But I think it's really, really useful, because when I have to do something in, let's say, Thailand or in Indonesia or in Malaysia or in Costa Rica, I can go to the map, and it really helps me a lot as an HR person to see what is legally possible, what is legally feasible. One of the things that we do to implement the standards as well is about equal benefits. I think you mentioned as well, Doreen, we wish we would have equal benefits everywhere, but we still don't. And we've been working on this for many years. We started at LGBT network, which we call Pride at Accenture, just to avoid the LGBTQIEX+. So we call it Pride. We started in 2003. So basically we've been there already, I think 18, 17 years, depending how you look at it. And we still don't have equal benefits everywhere. I think, you know, I hate to say it, but there are some countries in which we have to do a workaround. We have to micromanage a few situations. But I can tell you that if we close 4 more countries, then we'll reach that 100%. And that's what I'm working on. Basically, I'm working with the HR teams in those countries. And I don't want to mention them because I don't want to out anyone or expose anyone. But we are almost to get all those 500,000 employees at a similar level, and that's something really important as well. In some areas, we also have special, you know, benefits. For example, we offer in 11 countries, and some of them are illegally for LGBT people. Like, for example, Singapore, we offer transgender health benefits. You know, so basically, if an employee, their partner, or their kids will be transgender, then we actually cover all the costs and all the time and all the, you know, the worries. We wish, not everything, obviously, because we cannot do wonders, but we try to ease the pain for the employee. So I think that's something that is really also into the, you know, make sure that we support LGBT stuff. I think we mentioned about them, or Doreen mentioned about the Gable. As I said, we have around networks in probably 95 cities in 45 countries. So, and where we don't have network, which in a few countries we still don't have network, we do have Pride ally networks. So we have people who actually are allies of us, and they actually, you know, they wear a rainbow lanyard, and they you know, they support us in a way. So if you go to the office in Tokyo or in Buenos Aires, and you are, you know, you're applying for a job, and you see at the reception that the person in the reception has a rainbow lanyard, and you are gay, lesbian, or transgender, then you already feel like, I can be a bit more myself than if I wouldn't see that rainbow lanyard. So I think the Pride Allies is one of the things that we do to ensure again that the culture is more welcoming than just the policy on the internet. I think we also have many other programs like mentoring. We have also self-ID. We have many other things that we do. But I think what we try to ensure that we do is basically ensure that we don't out anyone. We don't want people to have the feeling they have to come out. But if someone wants to open the door of the closet, I want them to see a red carpet. I want them to see some kind of, you are welcome here. So all the things that we do, like, again, mentoring, benefits, allies, communications, events, networks, ERGs, is aimed to create that red carpet feeling that I hope people will have. So when they decide to come out, they feel that actually they're in the right place. And with that, to finish a little bit, we also have a supplier program, like mentioned by Doreen, in which we are actually teaching small suppliers to work with us, because we have been told that we are not very easy to do business with. And Procter & Gamble is a large, important client of Accenture. So probably you also know that, Doreen, that we are not very easy to do business with sometimes, I've been told. So I think we also have the same kind of program for small vendors, women-owned, LGBT-owned, minorities-owned, so that they kind of know how we work, and we take them to a training so that they can do business with us, because otherwise they would just fall through the cracks and we will never do something like that. So we have a small supplier in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, I would say, that actually provides, LGBT-owned, that does some things for us in Europe, and we have something in South Africa, we have something in North America. I think that again, it's not only about taking, but also about giving back as well. So I think that's what I would say. I don't know if I answered your question, Andre.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I love the red carpet. I think other people in the chat have liked the red carpet. I have a vision of a red carpet to the coffee machine at this point. I'm also glad, I'm really happy that we at ILGA have to keep updating our map. And that's because the laws keep changing. And we will be updating it in the coming days. There'll be a re-release of our state-sponsored homophobia report. We also have a trans-legal mapping report as well, which identifies the situation of laws around the world. I would just say, just because the laws are either good or bad in a country does not actually necessarily reflect the situation on the ground for people. I think we all know that, but it's a very important legal framework that we have to work with. And so please, thanks companies, and keep working with civil society, because it will help you navigate some of those challenges. So in fact, while I'm talking about civil society, a great time now to turn to Beck from the Human Rights Campaign. How are you supporting organizations to embed these UN standards?
Yeah, so we are very excited to join with the Partnership for Global LGBTI Equality in helping businesses think about how they operationalize the standards. And I think, along with Leanne and other advocacy organizations, we've been doing benchmarking now for almost 20 years. And the benchmarking we do in the Corporate Equality Index, I can align every part of the index with a standard, right? Like, it's companies in many ways already have some roadmap to operational of the standards. And the thing is, how do we just keep going, right? And those of us who do indexing know that getting 100 on the Corporate Equality Index is really the beginning of a journey, right? Like, it's not the end point, it's actually the beginning point. So one of the aspects that I'd like to cover is the fifth one, and this engagement in the public square. And for us, we've been working with businesses to build up their muscles and their courage about how they make clear to the external world their commitments that they've made so deeply internally. And that's everything from our Business Coalition for the Equality Act here in the United States, where companies support federal civil rights protections for LGBTQ people, to working with other on-the-ground advocacy organizations in Asia and multinational companies to support marriage equality in Taiwan. That's another example. Or an effort that we're getting ready to launch. It launches in just under 2 weeks, which is a multinational company effort, along with other civil society organizations, where companies are pledging to do work around destigmatization of people living with HIV and AIDS in the workforce. And so all of these are ways to make very clear publicly in engaging with public officials on the laws, on the societal standards, and how multinational businesses can be leaders in that space and in that voice in their own countries and all around the world where they do business.
Thank you, Beck. Leanne Stonewall. And actually, while I say that, I'm also going to say we're getting questions now coming in, and we're going to be turning to questions coming up. So I'm going to invite the panelists also to open up your Q&A little section there, and some of them are coming to you specifically. We'll do that in the next round. But Leanne.
Okay, yeah, I'll try and wind up really quickly. And I'm actually, again, looking through the chat, and you see a lot of people who are talking about being parts of employee reference groups. A lot of people asking very pointed questions about a particular problem they're trying to solve. So I guess what I wanted to say is, like, very similar to Human Rights Campaign, Stonewall, it does an index. It works very, you know, in very, very close contact with corporates. So what are we trying to do? We're basically trying to take those human rights standards, I'll confess I'm a human rights lawyer, that the United Nations, you know, agreed on decades ago, and help turn that into the day-to-day practice that is embedded in the, you know, in the standards that we have before us. And I mean, I've been asked to talk about, you know, how do we deal with this aspect of eliminating discrimination? Essentially, it's a very straightforward proposition. It's about taking those principles and putting them into practice and supporting people along that journey, and then having in place some kind of an accountability mechanism. So we do a lot of really practical things, which is help to define policies, help set up programs. We do a lot of training and network building work. We try to work to encourage organizations to build allyships programs, and we're actually doing a lot with civil society in countries where there are a significant number of global corporations to try and build, you know, civil society there to do what we're doing, but at their own national level, and have just launched a partnership in India. I think a lot of what we try to do is to learn from each other. So it's collecting that best practice. So we put together toolkits. We're creating an e-learning platform because we know we're not going to be able to convene together so much in, you know, in the near future. But the thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is the index. I think indexing is really, really important because it's a tool for learning, but it's also a tool for accountability. And it helps people within an organization to check in, right from the leadership for the person who's trying to, you know, work and include, you know, have inclusive policies, let's say from the human resources to the diversity and inclusion staff. So I guess from that point of view, we get a lot of data back from indexes, and we know that from the indexes that we've done domestically, where we have over 500 organizations that are reporting, 70% of those organizations have a policy, and this is important, that explicitly bans discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. I'm going to wrap up because time is marching on, but I did want to leave on a note of there is a lot left to do. And we also know from the mapping that we're doing is that lesbian, bi, and trans people in particular are being left out. And we know that there's a lot of challenges in that area. And we need to continue to track that and develop programs that target them specifically. Finally, employee resource groups. We should have a global conference of just them because they really are the agent of change within a lot of the organizations, whether it's from, you know, day-to-day operations or working in the public space. I think it's really important that we look more to them to provide leadership. I think that's enough said.
Thank you, Lana. A very specific question just came in, which was like, what do the panelists mean by indexing? Could you just for those of us who aren't used to that language?
Sure. I mean, Beck, you might want to jump in. Basically, what we've done, we helped develop the standards. We basically take, there's about 8 different fields that we actually measure through a series of questions. And those of you who have filled them out will I'm probably making it sound much more simple. It's a very large undertaking for many organizations where we look at the practice and policy. So we ask for evidence of policy, and then we score against that so that an organization knows where it's along in its journey. And we also celebrate success. And it's a good feedback loop for an organization to understand how they've done. So it's a monitoring and evaluation tool.
And if I could comment on that for a moment, because we have been also doing the same thing with Stonewall and with HSC and a few others as well. to be honest, feeling that will let you know how you are, but also what I think is most valuable for me, at least, is the feedback that we get. You know,
Yeah.
in this area you were great, but actually in this area you can improve, and in this area you were great, but actually that other company did something that it was better. So I think the feedback is more valuable actually than knowing when you are, because then you know what is the next step that you could actually do. So actually it helps you go further.
Thank you. And I think, thank you, Leanne, for raising the point around, lesbian, bisexual, trans are groups that are consistently being left out of the discussion. And we hinted that we were going to come back to this at this point in the conversation, which was we actually want to shift to 2020 and COVID-19 and what it's meant for us, what it's been like. And specifically, what does it mean for LGBTI equality? Some people have said that this is just opening the veil on what was already there, the discrimination, the disparities that existed. It's just showing that into greater focus. But I just going to very briefly, and I'm going to ask just for 1 minute, like a couple of sentences from each of you, because I'd like to turn to the questions, is what is your organization doing to make sure that the focus remains on maintaining and building momentum on LGBTI inclusion in our responses that we're all doing to COVID-19. So I'm going to jump it straight back to you, Leanne, to kick us off on that.
I've said a lot, so I really will be quick. I think that, like other organizations, we're working closely with employers to try and help, help understand what the kind of challenges are that they're having. A lot of us are working in very different ways. We know that the impact that will have on people who are perhaps working from home, or those people who may be excluded from the workplace because it's not safe to. So I guess for me, the key message would be to continue to monitor, to do research, and to understand that this has a system-wide impact on the sustainability of the very civil society partners in countries around the world where we all have an interest in helping them grow and be supported to continue to look at the role of business in their own countries. I think that's would be my main view.
Beck.
Yeah, we're doing a few things. One is to continue to do research on the impact of COVID-19 on our community. I think Javier mentioned earlier, what isn't measured isn't managed. And so doing research, publishing research on impact is really crucial throughout the whole course of the pandemic. We are engaging on, policy in terms of our government here with respect to the pandemic. And then, I want to elevate a few things we do directly with the community. We had a program this summer with Showtime, one of our corporate partners, to provide grants to LGBTQ-owned gathering places like bars and coffee shops and bookstores, because so many of our LGBTQ-owned small businesses that serve as kind of the neighborhood nexus point for our community were disappearing. So it's being creative, coming up with projects like that can help support and sustain our community throughout this really difficult time. Another we're doing involves really targeting the trans and non-binary community for job opportunities and upskilling. And that is a way to make sure that a community that's already deeply impacted by unemployment and underemployment has some tools in this time where we have even more pressure on the employment sphere.
Thank you. Javier.
Yeah, for me, there are a few things I would like to say about COVID and what we have done and what we are doing. I think that, let me be clear that that I hate COVID as much as anyone in this call, and I guess in the world. I think we are not happy about it. And I'm also looking at that from the Accenture lens. So I cannot really talk for people who have lost jobs, other things like that. So basically, I'm just talking about my own experience here, which is limited. I know that. But actually, we're looking at what we call Pride season, which is actually from, I would say, April, March until October. When you have the first Prides I think it's in Tokyo, and then the last one, or one of the last ones in Bangalore in India, and in Atlanta as well, by the way. I think we have seen more engagement than ever. I think, to be honest, COVID is horrible, but all of the budget that we had allocated for certain things that were going to happen in New York, in Atlanta, in Amsterdam, in Johannesburg, actually that became available for everyone in the world. So we could have a transgender inclusion event that was hosted in London, and it was actually visited from someone in Singapore, or from someone in Buenos Aires, or from someone in Vancouver. So I think, time zone dependent, obviously. So I think that, to be honest, for us at Accenture, I think we actually have been very, very, I think I'm really happy with the way it went. It was horrible, and I would prefer to go out with my friends and, be able to be free. But I think that in terms of reaching employees, we have probably had 600 events, online events, between April and October, November. Some of them serious, some of them fun. We had some quizzes, some drag queen, whatever. So basically, everyone had something that they could actually relate to, and we mix, education and fun. And I think looking back, I don't want to repeat it next year, to be honest. But actually, we reach more people than ever. We have been more engaged with our allies, with our communities. Also, we have done things, again, events with HSC, events with Open for Business, event with Stonewall. So I think it has been really, is very, very, I have to say, very democratic. This situation that we're all from home working, behind our laptops is horrible, but it makes us all equal. Look at all of us in the call here. This event today wouldn't have taken place if we were not at home, let's be honest, because I don't know if I could have traveled to Geneva or to wherever you have it. So I think that for us, we want to get rid of this as soon as possible, but we're going to use the opportunity to reach to most people than ever.
Thank you, Javier. We never let we always try to utilize the crisis, the advantages from it, even if we recognize how horrific it is. I'm going to turn to Doreen.
I'm going to continue in the same vein as Javier for Accenture. And as I start, I'll state that I know I make these comments from a place of real privilege. I think that our LGBTQ plus employees are either, like all of us, we're either monthly salaried or hourly paid, and people have not lost their jobs as a result. So everything I say, I guess, like with that qualifier. Let me comment one thing globally and then some things regionally. We as well did a pivot from a face-to-face Pride in the US to do a more of a COVID-19 relief benefit with some celebrities and big names like Adam Lambert, Katy Perry, Ricky Martin, Laverne Cox, etc., with the goal of raising money and bringing awareness. Our kind of strapline was, Pride is a movement, not a moment. So not being able to march didn't mean that we were going to stop. We were successful in raising almost $4 million US, which then was distributed to 6 LGBTQ plus inclusive charities, organizations like the Trevor Project and other organizations. Within the region, yes, as exactly the same as Javier, my audience is captive and we're organizing things. I have added more Gable teams in the last 3 months than I have in the previous year. Right now, we're in this kind of 2-week trans awareness week. We're defining week loosely. We had the first event yesterday, and there's still 4 more to go. We're taking the opportunity to say, wow, it's going to be virtual. The fact that it's hosted out of the UK, it can anyhow be available to everybody, and we'll record it and make it available on demand. So I would say our focus and our visibility actually has never been higher. Within my business unit, I've got the CEO talking about it to our most senior leaders. Our regional leader had a town hall on equality and inclusion just on Monday. We're getting a lot of visibility at the moment. So I know that it's not the case everywhere, and I know that I have a very specific bubble, but really the amount of leadership support, the amount of employee engagement right now is, I would say, at an all-time high.
Thank you, Doreen, for that. And I think also for framing it and understanding the very specific situation that your businesses are in, and maybe the bubbles of people who can do this. Mitchell.
Public Services International, which is the the Public Sector Global Union Federation, our members have been the key workers on the front line throughout this whole crisis, and it's their dedication and hard work that is actually getting us through this crisis. And at PSI, we are arguing that after this, there is no going back to normal, because after this crisis, because the old normal wasn't good enough. And within this new context, we're integrating LGBTI rights into our key policy areas, and we have an absolutely wonderful group of activists that are ensuring LGBT rights remain a focus for our organisation. More specifically though, we are looking to start a new campaign on how we can make public services and administration more inclusive and non-discriminatory. Central to this strategy is that you can't have inclusive public services without having inclusive workplaces. And by focusing on creating inclusive public service workplaces, we will ultimately, I guess, reinforce the necessity of having LGBT plus accessible public services. So that's where we're heading to at PSI.
Thank you, Mitchell. And take us out on this one, Gurchattan.
So, Andre, big picture. I mean, COVID has had an unprecedented impact on the world, and for good and bad reasons. We know it's brought us closer to the world of work, what the future of work will look like. It's had negative impact as well. I think more importantly, at the big picture level, we need to look at those who, again, my point, as I said, the challenges are looking at the informal economy. Those who were did not even have social protection safety nets to fall back on. Those were relying on gig work, informal work, without contracted work, who cannot even go out. And how are they protected as well? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have today. And this is where the ILO has a lot to say and is doing a lot on helping economies, helping certain sectors move into the formal economy and provide better social safety nets. And that's where we can also bring the conversation and say, look, how do we provide better social safety nets? Then also talking about reskilling people, because look, if we're building back better, how do we reskill the future workforce so that they can be equipped with the new challenges? So that's number two. Then I think in terms of data collection, I think there were a couple of colleagues here mentioned, the key importance of data collection. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I've come across in my day-to-day is providing data. And I would have to say thanks to the HRC as well. They've provided some key data at the beginning of this year, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the US workforce. And we included this information in a briefing note on the fundamental principles and rights at work on COVID-19. It came out a couple of weeks ago, and we included that data, and it specifically looked at how, LGBTI workers in certain sectors are pushed into certain sectors or highly feminized sectors. And those sectors are the most impacted. You've got administration, hotels, catering, restaurants. The sort of hospitality industry has been largely impacted. So we can sort of apply that sort of is it possible to apply that thinking then to other sectors as well, or other parts of the world, and say, okay, this is the case here, it must be the case there. Then we come back to sort of smaller picture. Smaller picture, we're looking at what we're doing within the ILO. Again, we just mentioned the briefing note that we put together, and there we actually talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the fundamental principles and rights at work, in particular non-discrimination, and there is a specific mention on LGBTI workers. We have a project in Brazil where we help trans persons move from the informal economy, equip them with skills so that they can move into the formal sector through and providing psychosocial services. Now, facilities closed down, infrastructure closed down. How can you continue that training so that the training is not stalled? That was done through technology, through smartphones. Online training through phones was provided. So we were able to do that work. We have another project looking at migration and the specific focus or research piece on LGBTI migrant workers from Southeast Asia. Again, that research has not stopped. We're continuing going thanks to smartphones and digital technology, we're able to connect with the remotest, we're even able to connect with LGBTIQ plus people in the remotest parts of the world, thanks to this technology. So yeah, we're looking at the big picture response and the small picture response as well. So thank you. I hope that helps.
It does, and thank you, Gurchathan, for that. And we as at ILGA World, again, we have that big picture. Very well aware that the vast majority of people are in the informal economy, that people are on the front lines working in service industries, and the enormity of the task with very complex situations in geographics or across our population groups around the world. We have a few more minutes at the end. We've got questions that have come in, and I know that a lot of you on the panel have been answering those questions. There is Doreen, there's a very specific question to you. If you're able to click on Q&A, it's come in from somebody. And I've seen Beck, you've been like responding, but there are two questions here which I wanted to come back to you all. So we have Marina Kellen has said, how do these guidelines for suppliers work within countries with legal discrepancies, where there's LGBTIQ legal discrepancies? Has there been pushback? Have any of you had experience on that? That's one. And then the second question comes from Quiteria Franco from Venezuela, who's asking, what can we do in relation to companies that have signed this global commitment, but are only limited in perhaps doing a forum during Pride Month? This has happened in Venezuela. So there's no real support to local independent NGOs. Can we reach out to, for example, Procter & Gamble in Caracas? Is there an inclusion manager we can contact? So I think that might be specifically to Doreen, but anyone else want to take any of the other questions there?
Okay, I can comment on the first one if you want. I think that, to be honest, we have a bit of a, I mean, we are a huge company and we are nerds, all of us. So basically we have lots of rules and lots of, frameworks to see what we do and how we work. And we have one framework actually to see about the type of work that we do. So if we think that some work would not be beneficial or would be actually marginalizing a few certain groups in the society, we probably will not actually do that job. So actually we have a bit of a filter at the beginning of engaging with a client or with in whatever country, in whatever industry, to make sure that we do the job that actually is called is belonging to actually our sustainability principles, and we call it actually doing the right business. So basically we are not going to do everything. We will choose a little bit things that are aligned with our values as well. So we may not engage in some opportunities if we think that that's not in line with our principles.
And Andre, I'll just add in that we do have Gable teams throughout Latin America, and I'm leading the team for Europe. I know Jason's based in Panama. I don't know all of the country leaders, but maybe we find each other in the Q&A, exchange emails, and I'll get you set up with who to reach out to.
Great, which probably takes me to the last question, which came in, that people were asking if the panelists would be willing to have their LinkedIn profiles shared in a follow-up email so that people can reach out. And I think we'll all be fine with that. So that's the way that we will be connecting. A reminder that we did start this panel by saying that we would be collecting all the links. I cannot believe the amount of chat that's happened in that chat box. It's been absolutely phenomenal to see this kind of global community. You all out there have been chatting amongst yourselves while we've been talking up here. And we haven't been able to respond to everything that's happening there, but I just wanted to give a shout out for that. I know there's a lot of employee representative groups out there, and yes, we do know about Out at Equal and what's going on. And they do a lot of international conferences as well. So there are places where you're already meeting, and we think that's fantastic. And we just want to, thank everybody who's joined the panel today, taken time out of your day to do this. And I also just wanted to say a very specific thank you to all the panelists, to Doreen, to Javier, Leanne, Mitchell, Gurchathan, and Beck, to each of you for joining today. If maybe just like a few, we have 1 minute, so just a few seconds if people have just a last word to say.
If I could say something quick, I always think that we always look at corporations and civil society, and we could achieve so much more if we will work together. So I think this is hopefully the beginning of many collaborations. And Stonewall and HSE obviously know us really better, but I think I look forward to working with anyone in this call to make sure that we improve the world day by day.
Thank you. Doreen?
Yes, absolutely. We can accomplish much more together than we can separately. Stonewall has been our main external partner in Europe, with also connections to ILGA and HRC in the US. Look forward to continuing those, and thank you so much for inviting me today. It's been a pleasure.
Leanne?
Oh, thank you so much. Marvelous initiative. Read the standards, turn them into practice. The world will be a much better place. Thank you so much for doing this today, ILGA World.
Gurchathan?
Well, very quickly, I think the key thing here is, we need to continue and work together. And I think that the heart of this is social dialogue, and in particular tripartism as well, bringing workers, employers organizations and government and businesses through their workers organizations, representatives, workers through the trade unions, civil society together to champion these rights and these standards as well, along with the International Labour Organization. So yes, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mitchell?
I just want to thank you. I'm not sure how many unions have participated in past panels, but it was certainly great to be invited and to speak with all of you. And I do believe that working together, we can make a lot of difference. So thank you very much.
And finally, Beck.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm inspired by my panelists, all of you on here, and the work that you're doing, as well as by this chat and everyone's energy online. I just want to say also a quick thank you to Gabrielle from ILGA, who really did all of the logistic work to pull this together. So thank you, Gabrielle. Indeed, thanks to Gabrielle, to Vicky as well, I know who's been on here. So thank you to all the people who made this happen, and thank you to all of you out there. We're going to continue the fight for LGBTI equality in the workplace and with business. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon, morning, evening. Goodbye.